I didn't prepare anything to introduce Peter. I don't need any preparation, I think. And the first thing I want to say is this is someone with such an extensive knowledge of the body, of yoga, of how the body functions and the body and mind connection. And if you meet this guy, you will easily be deceived because he is so relatable. Voor de gek gehouden. He is humble and also a human being. It doesn't feel like he's carrying a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience. And that's what I really liked about him. I think when you have to be or do important, or you have to wear a certain robe or whatever to show that you are experienced and that you have a lot of knowledge, I always become suspicious. Or the other way around. He is a master in what he does. And he can really tell stories, also from his own experience, that make it tangible for you, that make it relatable for you and your life. And I'm not sure what he's going to do in regard to class. I just gave him freedom to do so. He gave a lecture in Holland a couple of weeks ago, and we went there. It was there, and I really liked the lecture. It was it had the same homey feeling, and still it was personal, but still there was a lot of really valuable information there. What I want to what I also want to explain or want to emphasize is that when it's not clear what the lesson is, what the class is about, what the title of the class is today, you can easily become distracted or confused. You can easily feel confused. Try to get something out of it for you in relation to what you have been doing up until now. So within the context of where you are now, and within whatever context that you want to put it in your life, in your profession, what you do with other people. Because I don't want to give it names, because then we think it's going to be like this, and I don't even know it. Peter has had an enormous impact on the way I teach or have been teaching yoga. I was 24, so that's more than 30 years ago. And I met him a couple of years later when I was on my yoga path. And the impact that he has had on me was sharing what you feel inside and be really specific about it. I hadn't realized that was so impactful. That when you are really specific on how you feel and what you feel, what the sensations are, what's alive in you, and you give expression to that, you find the words that you can almost taste. That is where you connect with other people. Not with all of them, but with people that feel moved, that feel something move inside. And that connection is there, naturally. And that's what he did. So before that, I was teaching yoga, like in giving instructions on where to place the foot and how to stand or sit or lie down or whatever to move the muscles. And when I met him, and after I met him and went to California to study with him for 10 days, I found it the most important thing to really transmit my own experience, not as the truth, but as something that was alive in me. And then it touches other people. And that in itself is an art. It's an art, and it's also something that I feel needs courage to really make yourself so important and what you feel that you just give expression to that. And it doesn't matter what other people think of it. It just feels really good to do that. Then you become alive. But that's actually the basic and the main thing that he impacted me with, amongst so many other things that I cannot mention now, because I would teach you or give you a lecture myself. I'm not going to do that. Yeah. So I'm going to let him in.
You can ask her if she can close the door, Bart.
Yeah.
Then I think it should be fine.
Hi there.
Hi there.
Hello. Hi, Peter.
Hello.
How are you?
Just wave. Can you see them all? I don't want to move the camera too much, but you can see them, almost all of them.
Yes, that looks
Hi,
perfect.
Peter.
Hi. Good to see you guys.
How's the sound? Is it good enough?
I can hear you guys fine. I don't know
good.
about, answering questions and stuff, how close the people need to be to your mic. We'll just find out when we need to.
They can come up to the screen, to the computer, and then they can ask a question.
That'd be
if they
great.
want. Yeah. And I'm just here to assist.
Great.
And yeah, I just introduced you. I really, really want to thank you for this, for your being generous with your time and your energy and your focus, attention. And
Yes,
I just introduced you as someone that has been very impactful on the way I teach yoga. And I just wanted to let you know that the way you choose your words, and it's also in your book, sometimes it's almost poetry, but the way you use the words to describe the sensations that you experience has been so impactful that I made my own experience so important as to touch other people, because I was so touched. And I'm always in awe how that transmits from a teacher to a student, how it transmits that feeling of being in your body and moving the body.
Yeah.
And I thank you for that.
Well, it's in the lineage of teachers that I've studied with, that my teacher of 20 years was able to articulate the most refined experiences and the refined sensations in the body verbally. And what I didn't take in verbally, I was able to take in energetically from proximity to him when we would practice together, or when in a teaching situation. He taught like I teach, which is I teach movement by moving. And some teachers find that to be too difficult to do and talk and stay connected to the students, but I find it almost second nature. I also want to say to you, Esther, in all the years that I've been teaching, there's only a handful of students that I've taught that have embraced what I teach with such clarity, and you're one of them. I mean, we have only been together maybe a half a dozen times, you know, and how is that possible? It's because you've taken what I've taught you in person, and you've also integrated what I wrote in my book, and you've made it your own. And then
Mm.
we check in just enough, like every 4 or 5 years, just to make sure we're not off track, you know? And
Exactly.
it was so much fun seeing you guys in Utrecht.
Yeah.
I'm already making plans to come back next year. So,
Oh,
um,
great, great. Rut is here too, huh? Wavert. Yes.
hi.
He was in Utrecht too, huh? Yeah,
Yeah, fantastic.
yeah,
All right.
yeah.
So, how long have you guys been there today? How many hours of sitting on their butts have they had?
Not much, eh? They have been doing some body practices,
Great,
playing around in the grass. So
great.
yeah, they have been pretty active, and they have just had lunch. So
Okay,
it's six
great.
o'clock, around 6 o'clock with you, where you are, no?
That's right. Yeah,
Okay.
and you thanked me for, making this possible. What I need to pass along is to thank my wife, who had to get up at 5 o'clock this morning to get out of this room that I'm filming in.
Oh,
So that's where the real gratitude comes from, because she's not a morning
okay.
person. All right.
Okay.
So
Thank Tony for me,
I will do
Peter.
I will
Yes.
do that. All right. So we're going to sit for maybe 30 minutes, and then we'll get up and move for those of you that are feeling that lunch is digested and you're ready to move. I find that talking about these subtle places, to talk is one thing, but to actually feel helps integrate. And so some of the concepts that I'm going to present here around these words, gravity and grace, will be better understood once we start moving. So what I was in Europe for recently was to, share my book, which was launched right before the pandemic. And the focus for this tour was on these concepts of pain and healing. And we've all had experiences with pain. I don't really know too many people that enjoy pain. And I wouldn't say I enjoy pain, but I've come to a place where I recognize how important pain is in my life. And it's not that I go out looking for it, it's that life tends to bring it to me. And in the past, before I took yoga seriously, pain was something to avoid. And I just thought yoga was going to be another thing to help me avoid pain or to get out of pain, until I broke my back. And when you break your back, or any kind of serious injury, it's really hard to get away from it in the short term. And in the short term, the strategies for coping with pain um, are really individual. How you deal with pain is such a personal journey. And why? Because we all come to injury or pain with different physical bodies and different mental bodies. We all, and then just looking around the room, I don't see any two people in the room that are identical physically. And I would guess that your mental stories, your psychological stories are also varied. None of you have had the same journey in this life. You've all accumulated stresses and traumas, mentally or emotionally, that you carry with you. And even though, mental and psychological imbalances are hard to identify after the fact, like what is the residue of these experiences mentally, emotionally, psychologically? What is the residue of those experiences that's left, 2 months, 2 years, 20 years after an injury? And what I've learned is these traumas, these the residue of our experiences stays trapped at the subtle layers, what the yogis call the subtle body. And the subtle body for me is, it really starts with sensations. We all have these sensations that motivate us. The sensation of pain motivates us to change something in our lives. And what I've come to understand pain to be is the only language that the body has to communicate imbalance. The body doesn't speak, in my situation, the body doesn't speak English. The body speaks through pain. And it's there to identify where something is out of balance. And in the beginning of a process of pain, usually pain is manageable, and we try to go about our lives in a normal, way. But if we don't pay attention to pain when it's in a scale that's small, where we can deal with it, if we try to ignore it or try to medicate it or distract us from pain, it tends to get worse. It tends to get stronger, that we have these temporary relief from pain, but the pain returns. And even with yoga, this is why daily practice is so important. My philosophy, let's call it, with pain is, every day there should be a little bit of practice and a little bit of pain. And how much is that little bit? Again, it's a very personal thing. How do we approach pain? This is what I learned with my broken back. We approach pain as softly as we can. And I don't know what it's like in the Netherlands, but or in Belgium, I don't. In the United States, the pain is usually we try to fix it as quickly as possible, and we practice vigorously, and we're serious about our yoga or serious about whatever physical routine you're using to heal physical ailments. And with mental imbalances, we have a habit here in the United States of not talking about it. And I don't know, again, where you live, if people are open about mental, emotional, psychological imbalances, but it really helps to talk about it. And even to yourself, to name what it is you're feeling, to name what it is that your experience is as simply as you can. And then return to it, develop a relationship to it, and understand how, in my experience of these kinds of imbalances, they change day by day. Some days worse, some days less. What helps me create more balance mentally and emotionally? Physical movement. And that's the beauty of yoga, that by moving the body, both passive movement, restorative type movement, but also dynamic movement, where we're moving our bodies synchronized with our breathing. The reverse is also true, that if I quiet my mind, if I find activity that helps my mind let go of its grip on whatever problem that I'm trying to resolve mentally, emotionally, psychologically, moving my body, getting out in nature, it helps. And through that softening, let's say, of my grip on a mental condition, my body moves more freely. When we're tense mentally, it usually manifests in some way physically. It limits us physically, even if it's just physical desire to move. And I've had bouts of depression in my life. And in those times, the last thing sometimes I want to do is get out of bed in the morning, and yet movement is so important. And ultimately, I've come to realize that there's an inseparable nature between mind and body. And it's not, hey, let's meditate for 30 minutes or let's exercise for 30 minutes. Can we integrate our meditation with movement, like either a physical practice of yoga before you sit and meditate, or even while you're meditating, we have these subtle body movements within, these slight adjustments in our sitting position or in our reclining positions, where we can support the body in a way that creates space. And this is something that's really important. When I wrote about this in my book, through various experiences in my life, and let's talk about this area of the heart. I've had, these experiences from a very young age of death and loss. And as a child with no real tools I wasn't taught how to cope with these kinds of things. I tended to get numb, like I had no feeling around my heart in a in a visceral way, in a physical way. There was just this numbness around my chest. I couldn't understand what people meant when they said open your hearts, physically. And to me, it was just too, here in English, woo woo. It's just kind of a esoteric language that is difficult to put a finger on. And yet, as I continued to practice yoga, I started to feel that stagnation. I felt that there was something not open around my chest. It was like a pressure in my chest, and it didn't help initially to lift weights or exercise in the gym. It wasn't until I started creating some of these yoga asana poses, shapes with my body, that I started to lose my breath. I couldn't breathe. And that was super important, as you can imagine. And this is something that my teacher used to tell me. And there's a metaphor in this, but he said, if you're not breathing, you're dead. And it's true that if you're not breathing in a yoga pose, there are parts of you that are dead to sensation, dead to feeling into your body. So we start with the breath. And the first practice that we're going to do on our mats is a pose that intentionally compresses your chest and belly. And this is kind of an odd way to start the practice, that I'm going to put you in a situation that gives you a challenge on how to breathe if you're used to breathing into your belly or used to breathing oriented towards your chest. And this pose forces you into a confrontation in a way of what you do habitually, but offers you an alternative way to breathe. And if you learn it in these simple poses, that the opening sequence of Levity Yoga, which is what I teach, this opening sequence, these simple poses in the beginning, you allow yourself to begin the process of expanding the sensitivity of how to breathe in other areas of your body. So how do we begin that process? And I talked just briefly about soft, this idea of softening. I learned with my broken back that physical movement, to try and exercise with a broken back, was impossible. So I had to entertain myself, let's say, stuck in a bed. I had to entertain myself with the simplest types of movement. What were those movements? The expansion of my rib cage breathing. I was content on a bad day. It was hard to breathe because the expansion of my rib cage caused pressure where my back was broken, and that pressure that the expanding rib created on the inhale created an intense sensation of pain. So I was forced to be content with even the movement of my ribs breathing. And what I learned in this simple example is that if it's painful on the inhale, I want to shorten my inhales. But if it's not painful on the exhale, I want to lengthen my exhales. And that's what I did. intuitively, I just came to this realization that I had to keep breathing, but I had to figure out ways to mitigate the intensity on the inhales. And so it worked. Each day I would try to add 1 or 2 seconds length to my exhales, not by pushing, but by slowing the breath down. And in the beginning, I was content with a 1 to 2 second inhale and a 3 to 4 second exhale. After a week of breathing like that, I was able to lengthen my inhale a little more and also keep lengthening the exhale. And after a very short time, like 2 months with a broken back, I was breathing a normal inhale, 3 to 4 seconds, but an extended exhale of 30 to 35 seconds in for the exhale. So that meant in this process that for, you know, 3 seconds versus 30 seconds, I was out of pain 10 times more of my time was spent out of pain than in pain. And that extra time in what I learned was the parasympathetic response in the breath. The more my nervous system relaxed, that relaxation started to create softness throughout my body and space throughout my body. And this is where I began to feel into these places that had been numb. And this is really an important realization. There's a difference between feeling nothing and being numb. Numb is the absence of feeling. Feeling nothing is it's like when you have a chronically tight muscle or joint in your body, and through the practices that you do physically, one day that tension in the muscle or that tension or stiffness in a joint isn't there anymore. And there's this absence of tension, this lack of sensation, and it creates bliss. It's like a happy feeling, and I enjoyed that this feeling of nothing in the absence of pain, and it was joyous. It was what I've discovered yoga to provide. I think the title of my classes in Utrecht were healing and joy, and what that's been my experience in yoga. That yoga, the physical practices and the mental practices of yoga bring a sense of joy, and that sense of joy facilitates healing. It facilitates um, empowering our immune system and creating a state, a parasympathetic state in our nervous system that relaxes chronic tension in our bodies. And it literally starts with breathing. Yeah. So these lessons that I've learned on my mat, how important breathing is, the inseparable nature of mind and body, and how to integrate those two things. The beauty of learning it on the yoga mat is how applicable these relationships that I have with places in my body, internally and muscular skeletal, these relationships that I have, it's a perfect metaphor for the relationships in my life, the outer relationships in my life, the difficult people, the experiences at work or in family, whatever it is that creates stress in my life. If I apply these principles of breathing and softening and making space for this difficult situation and being more intimate with it, not instead of avoiding it or turning my back on it, is turn towards it and approach it with as less emotional charge as I can muster through breathing, through presence, through empathy, through compassion, all these things that in a confrontational situation, like politics in America right now, these confrontational situations, it's really hard to turn towards it and invite conversation with people if you're not balanced, if you're not steady within your own means. And in my own experience here on situations like that example of politics, I'm able to sit in a room with people that think differently than I do. And I'm able to pause and hear what they have to say, and then look for places where we share something. There's something in whatever they said, even if it's just, I have a mother and a father, like the most basic thing. We share that. And how can we start there and develop more awareness of other places where we can meet ourselves and meet the other? All right. So the last things that I wanted to talk about here are these terms gravity and grace. As I started to feel these relationships with the expansion of my rib cage, I also started to notice on the exhales how I felt the influence of gravity moving other parts of my body. That the softening, let's say the softening flat on my back, when I released my diaphragm, I felt gravity pulling my abdominal organs down, laying on my back down towards the floor. And that feeling of my organs dropping as the diaphragm softens, feeling the weight of my abdominal organs dropping, put a little bit of weight on my spine. And surprisingly, it reduced the pain where my back was broken. That this softening and micro weight of my internal organs and the visualization of my organs resting on my spine removed some of the intensity from the traumatized tissue in my lower back. And so now I'm starting to say, wow, gravity is my friend here. I'm not trying to fight gravity. I'm trying to bring gravity into my body and let gravity create the catalyst for movement, initiation of movement. This idea of letting gravity initiate movement was a light bulb moment for me. It's what, if the only amount of movement I can do in a yoga pose is surrender, soften, and feel the gravity's influence pulling the sensation of organs, bones, joints down, because there's only gravity has one direction, then again, this mental process that I had, how can I create shapes with my body to stretch a hamstring or just to open a shoulder where gravity initiates the movement, especially if I'm traumatized in a shoulder or in a hip or in the spine. Let gravity initiate the movement without the kind of oftentimes excessive force that muscular effort can create, what I call mentally imposed muscular effort. Let gravity do the work. If there's movement there, can I engage it a little more with muscle? And that's what we'll do in the movement that I teach here today. So that was how gravity started to work its way as a catalyst for movement. And then this grace idea came more out of an awareness of insight, of intuition entering when I let go of all the technique, all the things that I had learned previously about how to create movement in a yoga pose. What I had learned previously in yoga didn't help me with my broken back. I had to come up with a new way to move. And this is where the word grace comes in. Gravity is this attraction of physical bodies. I define grace as the attraction of spiritual bodies or non-physical bodies. If you're uncomfortable with this word spirit, that this place where inspiration shows up in our lives. If you're oriented towards religion or the divine, it's literally this source of intelligence. I relate to it as the intelligence of nature, the intelligence of universe, whatever term that you feel comfortable with. Can you find that understanding where you have a new relationship where insight, the source of insight and intuition come from? So these are these terms I use, gravity and grace. And grace manifests in many ways, in a very personal thing, just like what I was talking before. Can you create space in your life for grace to enter? And I write about this in more detail in my book. All right, so I've said a lot in 25, not even 20 minutes here. I'd like to use a little time here, 5 to 10 minutes, for questions and or comments from any of you in terms of what came up for you. What was it that I said, or maybe ideas that you had as I was talking that you would like to discuss?
Let me
If
ask Peter in the audience if there is a question here.
yeah, great.
Not be the first and the last.
Yeah.
Is there anyone that wants to ask Peter a question, or that something came up that you want to know more about? That was.
There are several people with pain here in the room, and they are not acquainted with yoga.
Yeah.
Maybe we can ask questions about how to go about that.
Yeah. So I'm translating now. Did you hear that, Peter?
Yeah, I can hear his in English, so you don't need to translate.
Okay. No,
yeah.
it's just when it's mumbling, I have to translate it.
No,
but you
no,
heard-
yeah, it was
Okay,
I
great.
was right on the edge of it being inaudible, but I got it. So
I'm Peter, by the way.
hi, Bart, good to see you. So when there's absolutely no experience with yoga, you're actually in a great place, and I'll tell you why. The movement what we're going to do is very unusual for a typical yoga class. And a lot of times, if you have experience with yoga, some of these things we're going to do are confusing because they're not the way you were taught. And so there's a mental struggle for the people, especially teachers of yoga. There's usually an initial struggle with, well, wait, that's not what my teacher taught me. This doesn't feel right. And if you're coming to these movements without any yoga experience, you don't have that mental struggle. It's all new. And you
Right.
may not be familiar with it, but at least you don't have a voice in the back of your mind saying, that's wrong. Don't do it that way. It's dangerous. It's blah, 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 whatever the story is. And these things that I do, if I get people that want to debate, and I'm not big on debate, but if they want to debate about why their way is better than the way I'm teaching it, to be honest, at this point in my teaching career, I listen and I just say, well, that's your experience and that's valid to a point. And this is what I've understood moving forward from that point. I had the same background. I learned this kind of more muscular oriented yoga for the first 10, 12 years of my yoga practice. That's all I knew. And I don't get invited to my annual Christmas party anymore for the people that practice yoga that way. They don't want me around because I just cause them stress. So I had to start a whole new Christmas party by myself with my 2 students that came with me, So
Yes.
what I'm
Yes.
what I'm asking you to do is forego, let's say, judgment that what we're doing is yoga, and just think of it as I'm going to create some shapes with my body to begin a relationship with these parts of my body in a new way. And the new way is integrated with breathing, gravity, and softness. Those 3 things is all. I don't even use the word stretch anymore. It's just about softening, gravity, and meeting yourself, turning towards whatever resistance you have in your body.
Softness, gravity, and
Grace.
grace.
Yeah, and in the intuition, listening,
Yes.
listening to the inner voice inside that allows a little bit of curiosity. This is a word that's super important. If what I'm demonstrating on the screen today when we start moving is too intense for you, there's going to be an intuitive or an inner voice inside saying it's too much. How do you know that? Because anxiety is created. So if you feel anxiety, but you're not hearing that inner voice, anxiety is the body's voice saying, hey, back off a little bit. When we breathe, the inhalation cycle in these shapes that we're going to create, the cueing, the instruction is to let the breath lift you out of the pose slightly. And I'll describe it. So the expansion of your rib cage when you inhale creates a retreat. It's like allowing yourself to come out of the pose. And I want you to employ that. If you're intent on getting to some destination, the inhalation is like pushing the reset button on your computer. It's like allowing yourself to come away from the pose a little bit with the inhale. And the exhalation cycle is just softening. And I'll cue where to soften. Where you soften, if you don't feel softening, I want you to visualize it. Like if I say right now, soften into your shoulders. Most of us can just, listening to me sitting, if I say soften your shoulders, you might be able to feel just that mental impulse to soften creates a slight sensation of release in your shoulders, and gravity might pull your shoulders down a little bit. It's more complex if I say soften into your butt. Okay, now that's kind of, I said
We
with a
cannot
little.
use the word but anymore, Peter. We are not allowed to use the word but.
Oh, okay. Well, that's why I bring it up, because today's class, we're going to relax that it's probably written into the yoga laws of Belgium that you can't say the word but I'm going to say that word, and I'll make it more anatomical by saying buttocks. It gets it gets a little more complicated when I start talking about sphincter muscles. And so softening the sphincter muscles usually is good for a laugh or two in America. And I don't know if it's good for a laugh there, but we're going to be doing a lot of sphincter softening in this class.
Does anybody know?
No.
No. Can you explain a little bit more about sphincter muscles? Because
Well, what's the
all of them
Belgian word for sphincter muscle?
Crispy.
Yeah. Okay.
It's located where the anus is.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a good question. Why is sphincter muscle so important in yoga? There are special places in the body where the yogis the term is chakra. And you may or may not have heard this word before, but it's in subtle body anatomy. So we have the physical anatomy, bones, organs, joints, whatever, physical components of our anatomy. The yogis believe that there's a subtle body anatomy, and these are the non-physical qualities. Like we all have an understanding of our heart beating, okay? But what causes the heart to beat? An electrical impulse. What is the source of that electrical impulse? No one knows. Isn't that interesting? Science has no idea where the impulse comes from. So it's like we have this battery somewhere in our bodies that pumps that electricity into our heart to create the heartbeat. The yogis understood where the source of that energy is coming from. They call it prana, or life force. And where does life force come from? Another big mystery, like, is it the divine? What is the divine spark? Michelangelo tried to, paint about it in the Sistine Chapel. What is it? And again, it's mysterious. And so there's this curiosity. These areas in the body are known well. The crown of the head, the third eye, the throat, the heart, the belly, the pubic bone, and the pelvic floor. These areas generally are where these energy centers are. The pelvic floor energy, and in English, I don't know, again, in your language, if there's a word for it, when people are tense and uptight, and especially around possessions, around money, around objects that they own, and they're really possessive, and we have this expression, tight ass, that type of person is called a tight ass. Where did that expression come from? I don't know. You tell me. Tight ass. Maybe someone who had this obsession with holding on to things one day woke up and said, wow, I've been gripping my ass all day long. Can I release my ass? Release, and what is it that we're releasing? The sphincter muscles. So it's not so much a thing for women. I find most women, I would never call a woman a tight ass. I don't think I've met that many, but it's morely a masculine thing, you know, like he's a tight ass. And why is that traditionally? I think because men are programmed slightly differently. The masculine principle is really about action, you know, and defending the family and slaying the tiger and, you know, killing the food, you know, whatever animal that they were having for dinner that night. So that tension, that anxiety was a natural response, the fight or flight syndrome of the nervous system to tighten, to conserve energy by shutting down certain parts of the body. Is just for most men, they've forgotten how to turn it back on. And so that cue of softening the sphincter muscles is more about creating space in the pelvic floor area, this energetic center of grounding, the bottom root chakra. It's about creating space, creating openness. As soon as you soften into the sphincter muscles, you get a sensation of inner space. And just to be clear about this word space, most of us, when we go outside on a clear night, away from cities, out in nature, and we look up at the sky and we see this infinite array of stars and this, you know, uh, in English, it's this word awe, A-W-E. We have this experience of awe of that, which is the root for awesome, this incredible experience of space, outer space. We have that same ability to feel the awe of inner space. When we soften into areas that were constricted, we get a sensation of space and it feels infinite. It feels as if that inner space could expand, 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 expand through the pelvis, through the pubis, through the belly, through the heart, through the throat, through the third eye, and literally expand out. The ultimate state of inner space is through the crown chakra, and that connects with the divine, the what the yogis call the divine or outer space. So this is me trying to understand what the yogis meant about chakras, is this awareness of inner space, of release of muscular contraction or subconscious grip, bracing for psychological trauma, physical trauma, whatever it is. How do we deprogram, uncoil, unwind this chronic tension in our bodies? So this is why I talk so much about sphincter muscles. It's a great place to start. It's a great place to start. I will say that you don't want to completely release your sphincter muscles because that would be very messy. Thank you. That was my attempt at humor. I wasn't sure if that was going to translate in English.
Yes. Epic. Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, by the way, if I don't know how many of you have read my book or looked at my book, there's a chapter on humor in it. Why is humor so important in yoga? Because humor, I call it the seventh sense. Our sense of humor is the seventh sense. Intuition is our sixth sense, and then there's 5 other senses, physical senses. Humor has the ability to derail the seriousness of the mind. And that seriousness of the mind also tends to choke our expression around the heart. So through little momentary attempts at humor, I create a channel, a subtle body sensation channel in your body that actually dilates your blood vessels, dilates some of the chronic gripping in your body to release. And that's important. And there's science now saying how amazing laughter is for people that have high blood pressure or a variety of ailments in support of healing. So humor is part of the toolkit for yogis. I just haven't met too many funny yogis besides Esther, Bart, and myself.
Anybody else? that's a question. I have a question, Peter, that is asked many, many times. And it's so fundamental that first time someone asked me, I was actually thinking, are they stupid
Right.
or what? Why is it important to practice and
Yeah.
to practice daily?
Yeah. In the beginning of my yoga practice, it was so painful. I had tight hamstrings, tight shoulders, all from too much weightlifting in the gym. Everything was tight. And so I had to discipline myself, like mentally will myself to get out of bed in the morning before work to practice yoga. And it wasn't enjoyable. However, because of that strong willpower, I was able to notice change in a very short amount of time. What is short? In 2 weeks, I was able to soften my hamstrings enough where I could touch my toes bending forward standing. That was huge. On a good day when I started yoga, bending forward standing, touching my kneecaps was a good day. So in 2 weeks, I went from touching my knees to touching my toes. Eventually, that discipline to get out of bed became desire because there were other parts of my body that in a relatively short amount of time, I felt incredible shifts. So I think it's important to have a daily practice of yoga just for the continuity of it, because the body craves relationship and regular practice builds relationship. And it's not about getting there fast. As a matter of fact, soft and slow is better than hard and fast. Yeah, I could take that metaphor into many realms. And
I
the
knew
women
it.
the women in the room know what I'm talking about.
Exactly.
The men in the room don't know usually. An enlightened man knows what I'm talking about, right, Bart?
Yes, we are very awake at 6 o'clock in the morning.
So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. And you can use
Okay,
that
Peter.
little joke for the really serious people, you know.
Yeah.
That was not waar in the weekend.
There's another question,
Oh,
Peter.
yes.
I just gonna shout. Are you hearing me?
Yes, I hear you fine.
Okay. So I was curious if in your experience, when people start to soften through the practice, that their access to intuition gets stronger. That's my curiosity. What you have
That's
found.
exactly what happens.
Yeah.
There's a woman who wrote a book in 1947 with the title Gravity and Grace. I didn't know that when I started writing my book. Halfway through writing my book, I discovered her. So I started to try and find information about her. She's French, and a lot of what's been written about her is in French. So it was hard for me to find stuff, but eventually I started to find translations. I started my book with a quote from her, and I'm going to read it to you. So grace, and when I say the word grace, that includes insight and intuition. These are energies that grace provides. Grace, this is from Simone Weil, the French author that wrote Gravity and Grace in 1947. Grace fills empty spaces, but it can only enter where there is a void to receive it. And it is grace itself which makes this void. So when we start to soften, and remember that metaphor that I used earlier, where if in a tight muscle, in a tight hamstring, or if you have tight hamstrings, most men do, when you create softness in that hamstring and all of a sudden you can move a little bit further, it creates a feeling of spaciousness and joy, and literally this condition that Simone Weil is writing about, it creates that inner void, that inner space for intuition to enter, or for grace to enter. And grace also brings circumstance. This is the other thing. If I make space in my schedule, if I like traveling, I just finished a month on the road, and so many coincidences came in to me on the road, including this one that I just wrote about recently. While I was in Paris on this trip, I got lost in my morning walk around these narrow streets in the Marais district of Paris. And I was worried about how to find my way back to the flat that we were staying in. I turned this corner, and here's the wall of the National Archive Museum with a big double life-size poster of a woman, all in French, exhibit at the archives. And the only words in English on it were Simone Weil. So here I am, lost on a street that I had no idea where I was going. And I see Simone Weil's name out of a, whole paragraph of French words. And that I walk into the museum, and there it is, all this exhibit on this woman's life that I knew nothing about. And some of it was in English. And it was like I started to relate to her as a human being instead of an author in a book. And it was phenomenal, the shared experiences and that were written about her life with my life. And it's almost like, wow, I have this odd connection with this woman who died long before I was born. And we have book by the same name. We have life experiences that are similar. I want to know more about her. So I'm going to have to learn the French language, I guess. So I hope that answered your question.
Beautiful.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, let's move. So
I have another one. Can we have another one?
Oh, yeah,
Peter?
yeah.
Yes?
One more, sure.
Maybe can I just make sure? So, like you said that you were able to reach your knees and then your toes in 2 weeks because
Yes.
you felt softness, and what kind of recipe you used? Softness, gravity.
Yeah. So imagine we're going to do this pose today. Standing and bending forward and trying to touch the floor. Right. My agony, my nemesis, like I was like the devil, was getting beyond my kneecaps. And in the gym, when I used to, because they told me when I was a weightlifter, stretching is good for you. So my goal was to touch my toes, and it did damage to me because I was going about it the wrong way. So the softness that I learned about came from my broken back experience. In that pose, bending forward, if I softened the sphincter muscles, it created a release of pelvic floor muscles that allowed my sitting bones, and I'm just going to get really anatomical here. That softening of the sphincter muscles allowed my sitting bones to separate a little bit, and it allowed my tailbone to drop a little bit. Those two movements facilitated my hips bending forward more. And I came to realize that my tight hamstring wasn't so much a tight hamstring as it was a tight hip. And so as I came to that realization, I stopped worrying about the hamstring and I focused on how to soften deeper into my hips. The next place that I came to awareness was what I call the skin below the navel. This is the pubic area. And the skin below the navel is the seat of the water element. This second chakra is the first chakra is earth, the second chakra is water. So the water element in the body, that was movement, fluid, softness. Water is this beautiful flow. And so as I softened the skin below my navel, and then a little bit higher, consciously soften my diaphragm as I'm exhaling, put my attention into the diaphragm and feel it softening. These three places, sphincter muscles, skin below the navel, and diaphragm, that's what got me to touch my toes. And it was all gravity movement. There was no reaching for the toes. There was no pushing for the toes. It was just each inhale, I allowed the breath to lift my torso, my upper body out of the pose a little bit. And on the exhale, soften sphincter muscles, skin below the navel and diaphragm. And gravity took me lower. And over time, that allowed me to eventually put my palms flat on the floor. And then I took that and I tried to do it sitting. Sitting and bending forward is a whole different animal because gravity can be not as effective. So you have to get more sensitive to softening, and you have to soften up higher. In seated forward bends, you have to soften through the chest and shoulders so you feel gravity also pushing the upper body down a little bit. So this is how it works. And in the beginning, as I said earlier, if you don't feel these places softening, visualize them. Because what science is showing is visualization is an important first step in activation of connective tissue, of the visceral experience, the physical experience of connective tissue in your body. And the connective tissue research is in my book is phenomenal because it really made me aware of how important softening into connective tissue is, more than stretching muscles, more than opening joints. If you create softness in your connective tissue web, everything responds. The joints open, the muscles lengthen, the organs flow more freely, and gravity does its work. And the beautiful thing about yoga, if for those of you new to yoga, is somehow our ancient ancestors figured out almost an infinite number of shapes in our body to get gravity through it. Gravity is moving in one direction, so we have to move our bodies in these different shapes to allow gravity to move through at different angles and different forces. Headstand is a perfect example. You know, we're upside down standing on our heads. Why do we do that? Because this chakra on the top of our head is the master regulator of our endocrine glands. The pituitary and pineal gland in the head gets stimulated by headstands. So by standing on our heads, the yogis, ancient ancestors, figured out that it brings balance to the endocrinological forces of our body. And that's important if you're healing from kind of pathological imbalances. The endocrine gland system is super important. Your lymph nodes, everything benefits from gravity. And I say this too, that gravity is like the yogi's acupuncture needles, because gravity provides forces on certain important points in our body that the yogis call marma, just like a Chinese doctor puts a needle into an acupuncture point to activate a meridian that moves to a channel or to a tissue or to a joint. So that's how it works.
Wow.
I know some of these simple questions have big answers.
Yes. Okay.
Ready?
I think we can move.
Okay, so I would ask, I don't know how close if you guys, I showed some of you maybe having water. If your bladder is full right now of fluid, I'd ask you to take a brief break right here as we get set up on our mats and empty your bladders. Because when you release the sphincter, it's not just the anal sphincter, it's also the urinary sphincter. And I don't want to embarrass you if you soften your urinary sphincter.
Okay.
See, I taught enough to know
you
there's
were
a lot
right.
of full bladders. Okay, so the rest of you, let's get set up with your props near your mat. I would move all the water bottles away. We don't need water bottles, but have your props ready.
Okay. Which props do you need other than mats?
I think everyone should have a block for the side bends, but everything else is just by personal choice. If the knees are bad,
instead of blocks, we need to use cushions. We're somewhere else in a retreat center, so
that's fine. Cushion,
we
cushions
have
are
bigger
fine.
cushions, then we can lean on them, maybe? Is that
You
okay,
know,
or?
These
Yeah.
things. Yeah. So
Yeah.
whatever they need. That size cushion that she just moved, that's probably too big.
Yeah,
But
that one.
smaller cushions or folded blankets. Do you have blankets?
Yes.
I can
Yeah.
get
So folded
Yes.
blankets or small cushions, that would be fine.
Okay, great. We'll do that. See
Okay.
you in a bit.
See you in a bit.
Wat wou je weten? Ja, we hebben nou ja, een hoog kussen is handig. Er zijn een oefening waarbij je op moet kunnen steunen. Dat is te laag, denk ik. Dus deze is al een stuk beter. Maar Bart gaat dekens halen. Ik zal misschien nog een paar kussens halen. Ja, dan moet ik wel even op kussen. Hier, daar is het nog een beetje. Ja, zou die eerder inderdaad. Ik kan er ook 2 pakken, hè? Ja, er is er nog eentje. Ja, dat is goed. Ik denk dat we allemaal wel iets hebben, hoor. Een beetje improviseren, hè? Ja. Daar is nog een kussen. Ja. Spinsters zijn al. Ja, ze gaan al goed in de ontspanning. Ja, daar kan ik niet uitsluiten. Nee. Hebben jullie daar geen last van als ik dat voor het neem? Je ziet mij niet, hè, hier in beeld. Nee. Ah ja, daar is een beeld. Ja, ik wilde hem even. Ben je dat aan het opnemen? Ik ben dit aan het opnemen, ja. Ik doe daar verder niks mee natuurlijk. Maar ja, dan moet ik het van hem opnemen. En het is misschien leuk om terug te kijken. Hè? Ja, dan zie je dat. Nee, ik sta niet in de weg. Nee. Ik ben echt niet in de weg staan om dit te zien. Maar je gaat niet veel moeten kijken.
Het is belangrijk dat hij ons allemaal ziet.
Nou, hij zal niet echt gaan corrigeren.
Ah, nee, oké.
Het is meer iemand die gewoon, je moet gewoon maar goed luisteren naar wat hij beschrijft en proberen om dat te voelen. En als je het niet voelt wat hij zegt, dan stel je maar voor dat je dat doet. Dus wat hij visualizen noemt, is eigenlijk gewoon dat voorstellen dat je het wel doet.
Ja.
En dan gebeurt er iets.
Ja.
Grace.
Ik vind dat ook moeilijk.
Hey Esther.
Ja, Grace is, je zou hetzelfde je zou het dichtheid kunnen noemen. Je kan het gratie noemen. Grace is wat ik me altijd voorstel is als een plant goed geaard is, goed geworteld. Dan groeit die mooi in een rechte lijn richting de zon. Als een plant niet goed kan aarden, dan zie je ook vaak dat hij allerlei bochten enzovoort. De manier waarop dat gebeurt, maar als dat gebeurt zoals het voorzien is eigenlijk, dat is de manier waarop wij ons goed voelen. Anders moeten wij ons in allerlei bochten brengen en dan kun je er wel grace in vinden, maar dat is niet de grace of God eigenlijk. Dus eigenlijk dat je de aanraking van je goddelijke ervaart. Dat is het eigenlijk. En dat klinkt heel bombastisch, maar dat is wel een gevoel waar je naartoe kunt werken. Hoe kan ik mij goed voelen? Wat eigenlijk maar een voorstel. En hoe kan je dat aanpassen? Dat is wel belangrijk dat je dat doet. Grace, yes. I was just explaining it by just an image that I had. A vision of a plant. You know, like when you have a little bean, you put it in the ground and it comes out, and then it searches for nourishment in the ground. So the roots are growing, and out of the roots, the more steady it becomes, the more grounded it feels, gravity, the more it can grow growth from there. And the way when you see how a plant grows, there is grace in that. It doesn't
So it's
grow like this. Oh, that is really a new word.
What you just described.
Yeah, yeah. So that's just an image that I keep in mind to give myself a feeling of it. And I think that's more important than understanding now on the intellectual level with races.
We were just wondering because that you show grace.
Yeah, but to be grateful if you recognize that feeling. That's what you can experience. When you are grounded, you are content, you can rest in your lap, and then
Hey,
I
Esther.
think, hey, I think they've all come back.
Is there a screen on the wall that's
Yes.
bigger? Okay,
Yes.
great. That's what I
Yes,
thought.
we have a big screen or a big enough screen for them to watch. So I'm watching
Okay,
now
good.
the computer, but it's attached to a bigger screen. Yes,
Okay,
so they can see you.
What I'd like you to do is turn the mute on when I start so that I don't hear any background noise from you guys.
Great. Yes.
But I do have a question, and this was something that I'm aware now that Amazon in Europe is selling print-on-demand copies of my book, so it's much easier for you guys to get books now than before. Like you don't have to go to a bookstore or anything like that. So you can just let people know if they want a book, because I don't think I gave you any copies, did I?
No, I bought one extra. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
If they want one for their own, they can just order it on Amazon and it'll be there in a couple days.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Great. I'm ready. Are you guys ready?
Okay. So I'll mute the class now, right?
Yes. Go ahead
Okay,
and mute.
I'll do that.
Yeah.
Okay.